What's up, folks? I'd like you to meet apostate Aladdin, who is an ex-Muslim YouTuber. Aladdin, welcome to DD Rational.
Thank you so much for having me.
He's an ex-Muslim YouTuber, like I said, and his content, I've watched a lot of it, and I see that his views are extremely critical of Islam while still being sympathetic to Muslims. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say so for the most part. And it's not necessarily that I have more sympathy for Muslims than I have other people. I just see them as humans like the rest of us.
Exactly. Now, this is in contrast with a lot of other ex-Muslim channels I've seen, which their views are extremely right-leaning to start with. And in most issues, let's say political issues, like we saw this during the Israel-Palestine issue and more recently during the UK riots, they seem to side with whichever side Muslims are not on. And they seem to conflate Islam with Muslims sometimes, and their views seem more or less Islamophobic. That's what my understanding is. Would you say that that's something fair of me to say?
For the most part, yes. There's a lot that could be said about this topic, and I'm sure we'll get into it in this chat. Where do I begin? I mean, Islamophobia is a tricky word because it's used to silence any criticism of Islam. And I don't think that a lot of us who criticize Islam have an irrational fear of it, or maybe even a fear of it at all. We just criticize what we don't like or see as harmful. But I understand where you're coming from, that possibly they're doing it out of hatred rather than out of trying to find solutions or actually trying to fairly criticize the religion. To the degree that I sometimes see them jumping on stereotypes or tropes or inaccurate information just to make a point, which we don't need to do. We can criticize Islam with the facts alone.
True. So you're saying what they do is they misrepresent the point, or they somehow strawman a lot in their arguments just to attack Islam?
I wouldn't say just a lot. I'm just saying it happens, and it seems to be that the goal is more important than the methods, and the ends justify the means. So as long as someone is aiming to criticize Islam or prevent it from spreading, there's a lot of allowance for how unethical they can be in that process, or how much they can bend the facts just to make that happen. And I'm not comfortable with that.
And you said earlier that they come from a place of hatred. What do you mean by hatred exactly? Is it from their upbringing? They hate something they experienced during their upbringing? Is that what you mean?
That's not really what I mean. And I don't mean to generalize. I'm saying that from what I've seen, often it seems to be that people who criticize Islam are on the receiving end of a lot of hate, myself included, no matter how nice they are about it. That's just a fact. So there are a lot of people who reflect that hate back, or they have experienced so much of it that they think, well, screw this. There are no rules here. They get to do it, so I get to do it too. It's that primitive mentality of, they started it, or an eye for an eye sort of thing. And there's a lot of generalization as well, because they receive a lot of hate from Muslims. So they start to see any Muslim as the person who sent them hate. So they're not necessarily able to discern the difference, or even if they say that they are, their actions would show otherwise. So that's not applying to every single person who is right-leaning. That's not what I mean to say, because my issue with the problem in this ex-Muslim space is not that they're not as left-leaning as they'd like them to be, or that they're too right-leaning. That's not the problem. But there seems to be a correlation between being fed up with how Islam is, sheltered from criticism, and turning to the far right for support. That's the trend that I'm seeing.
You're saying that the hatred is more towards Muslims who attack them right now, rather than whatever they may or may not hate, whatever aspect of their upbringing that may have contributed to this hate.
I mean, that could be a factor in it as well. Perhaps if someone has gone through a lot because of Islam in their life, if they haven't dealt with it in a healthy way, they still carry that resentment and that anger, and it can show in the way that they talk about the topic in general, or the way that they, I suppose, subconsciously hold every Muslim accountable for what happened to them. But again, I don't feel comfortable generalizing, and I'm not saying that every single person who I don't agree with or is too right leaning for my liking is someone who thinks that way. But it is a trend that we see in these spaces, and because it takes a lot of determination and effort and stubbornness, I suppose, in a sense, to keep continuing to criticize Islam despite all the hate. You have this biased filtering system, essentially, where people who are more balanced, more nuanced, they get tired, they get exhausted, they don't want to do this any longer. And people who are more dogmatic about their views, who have more of a burning passion, not necessarily in a positive way, they are the ones who end up remaining for longer. So that's why you see that bias in this space.
Okay. So I asked you that question particularly because the ex-Muslims I'm familiar with, the channels that I'm familiar with, are very right-leaning in their perspectives. And you're one of the exceptions. And that's one of the reasons I really like your channel, because your views and what you say, the nuance in what you say, and your views particularly are kind of aligned with mine also. So I wanted to get your take on this.
I don't usually use the distinction of right-leaning versus left-leaning because I usually don't even talk about politics in my videos for the most part. But I can't ignore the fact that politics seeps into everything, and that people take opinions that can belong to one camp or another. From my perspective, I don't assess whether an opinion is right-leaning or left-leaning before I adopt it. It's whether or not it makes sense to me. So if it turns out that I am more left-leaning than right-leaning, that's, I suppose, where the facts let me, as far as I know.
So you mentioned that politics kind of seeps into everything, right? I kind of face that problem, or I wouldn't call it a problem. I kind of face that in the work I do as well. I mainly talk about science topics, and I talk about rational thinking. So I debunk some pseudoscience topics that float around in popular discourse or whatever. And when I do that, there are a lot of political leanings and political parties. I think there's a lot of politics that peddles a lot of pseudoscience. So invariably, my content is partially gonna get a little political, even if I try not to make it so. So I understand what you mean, and of course, religion is going to involve a lot of politics, and I understand that. So I wanted to ask you about this thing. So what we spoke about earlier, how some ex-Muslim channels have views that are kind of, siding with whatever side Muslims are not on. That is kind of, or what I feel about it is kind of like an attitude of the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of attitude. And that's not true. We can talk about a lot of instances there, but I wanted to get your thoughts on whether this is why people act like this somehow.
I think that definitely factors into it. There's also, like I mentioned, that we don't get a lot of allyship in left-leaning spaces or in places that are more inclusive or more balanced, because they tend to be afraid of being labeled as hateful of Muslims or xenophobic or racist or something of the sort. So when we get ignored or even demonized by such voices, and only platformed by certain voices that are more decisive, I suppose, and more divisive, then it seems inevitable that a lot of us will gravitate towards the more hateful rhetoric. So yes, they do think that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, especially when they partner with someone with a Christian background or a Christian audience or a Hindu audience, especially nationalists, Hindutva. We see that a lot. And I don't know what came first. I don't know if it's a strategy, like an intentional strategy to side with these people, or if it just kept happening and they thought, what's the harm in this? Who else is going to be my ally in this fight? I can't say which came first, but I know that it definitely fuels a lot of their views, because it puts you in an echo chamber when everyone around you agrees with your point. And and tells you that you're on the right track, you're very unlikely to change your opinions. And I know that could apply to me as well, which is why I'm very open to change. I'm open to discussion. And I don't like to surround myself with one group of people that only tell me that I'm doing a great job.
Yeah, it could be a bit of both, like you said. I wanted to get your take on. So this is something we saw during the Israel-Palestine issue. I saw a lot of support for Palestine coming from the LGBT community. There were explicit slogans of LGBTQ for Palestine and stuff like that. And one common argument that I often hear regarding this is, if you actually were in Palestine, they would cut off your heads. And that's a rhetoric often in right-leaning circles also. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. What would you say to someone if you heard them say something like this?
I know it's difficult and it sounds silly, but we need to deal with problems one thing at a time. So if we're going to make leaps and we're going to say that we're going to presume that everyone in Palestine would throw you off a roof, which is an unfair assumption to make, then we can assume a lot of things about a lot of people in, say, the USA. Is it fair to then bomb a section of the United States who are not okay with your legal rights when it comes to abortion, or with your right to marry another person, or who would actually shoot you for the slightest thing? Obviously, this is very poor logic. You can't just be the judge and be okay with their execution based on something they may or may not do. And even if that were the case, you'd have to deal with one problem at a time. First, you make sure that they're not being killed unjustly, and then you make sure that they're not killing anyone unjustly. Yeah, and they make it seem as if the reason that Palestinians are being murdered is because the Zionists or the Israeli state cares about gay rights. I don't think that is the motivation behind it. So to bring it up in that fight is very disingenuous. They're just trying to find ways to justify what is happening in Palestine. And this is an issue that has been very divisive, because even though I don't even come out and say that I am pro-Palestine and I have a solution for the region, all I'm saying is I don't need to side with the people doing most of the killing or with the terrorists. I mean, there are voices in the ex-Muslim space, for example, that say that Israel should be even harsher. And just by opposing that, just by saying that's a very anti-humanitarian thing to say, and what does that even look like, that gets me labeled as pro-Hamas. That's how simple-minded some of these people are. I don't think it's getting us any closer to a solution. And I don't think that just because you left Islam, that makes you an expert on what's happening in the Middle East, or an expert on war, or anything related to that. And we have to recognize the responsibility that we hold as people with platforms, as people whose opinions others respect, even though our opinions don't necessarily deserve that degree of respect or reverence. And just saying that gets me labeled as this Hamas supporter, as this hater of democracy, as someone who supports the worst things that Hamas or Palestinians have done, or anyone who's anti-Zionist or anti-Jewish has done, even labeling me anti-Semitic, when that's not at all my opinion or where I'm coming from with this criticism. So even though I didn't even say that I'm pro-Palestine, that was enough to demonize me.
I think what's happening is people try to model whatever they're seeing. So, for example, they see you saying these things, and to make that sit with whatever they're thinking, they have to think of you as pro-Hamas or whatever it is, so that everything else makes sense to them. So they simplify it in the easiest way possible in their heads to make sense of whatever they're seeing, irrespective of whether that's true or false.
So I want to comment on these Gays for Palestine movements. I can see how nonsensical that seems, and you're rightfully criticizing that all day long. There's no problem with that. But that doesn't automatically mean that supporting Palestinians is a bad thing, just because some people are doing it possibly against their own interests. I find that this Gays for Palestine movement is more of a trendy thing. But just because people are doing it because it's trendy doesn't mean that it is wrong to do it in the first place. It's just their motivations might not be the best ones, or they may not realize the complexity of the issue, and it's just the next simple topic to and it's just the next simple political position to take. I think that a lot of them are doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They truly think that they're helping. They truly think that people are being oppressed and we want to stand up for them. But it does seem a bit funny when it is the LGBT doing it, who are very, very oppressed in Palestine and probably would be. Even if Israel stopped attacking Palestine, the gays would still not be doing very well in Palestine. We accept that as a fact. It just doesn't change that the cause itself might be a good cause.
Yeah. So if I got this correctly, what you're saying is the fact that they're gay, supporting Palestine, the fact that they're gay doesn't matter in this whole thing. The fact that they're supporting Palestine is what matters. And is that what you see? Is that a fair assessment?
More like, even if they're doing it because it's trendy, or even if it doesn't look like it makes sense, that doesn't say anything about the validity of the cause itself. It may bring into question this connection or why there's a connection at all, but that's not a criticism of the cause itself.
Now, another similar criticism that I hear, we saw this during the Israel-Palestine issue. I hear people saying that Islam is opposed to democracy, and Israel is the force of democracy in that region. And I hear a similar thing about the whole world. Like, Islam is anti-democratic. It's fighting against the democratic world. So if you support democracy, you must be anti-Islam or anti, and they use that rhetoric to promote an Islamophobic view. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a very simplistic and idealistic way to view the world. And it's also a false equivalence in a sense, because if we were to equate democracy with goodness, and countries that have democracy can do no wrong, that is false. Because when you look at the USA and what that country has done in the name of democracy to bring democracy to other countries while abusing their freedoms, while abusing what democracy actually means, it's just a facade to do whatever you want to do and get away with it just under the name of democracy. It is true that Islam and democracy are not very compatible. I would say that Islam, if you were to follow an Islamic Sharia law, that is absolutely not democratic in any way. But that's no excuse to then do whatever you want to a Muslim country or Muslim population just because of that. Besides, I don't think that the Israel-Palestine issue is necessarily just about Islam. Many Muslims make it about Islam, and I think that's a bad move. It shouldn't be. But this is a lot more complicated than just Islam versus Judaism or Islam versus democracy. You can't just say democracy and get away with anything. That's not how the world works.
Yeah, I got it. I think you cleared up some things for me as well. Moving on, I want to change topics a bit. So, Aladdin, I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to put your thoughts into words in public and start a YouTube channel? And how's the journey been so far?
Well, first I was participating in text-based forums, and I was trying to help kind of behind the scenes. I never thought that I would be the person who goes in front of a camera and speaks, because in my personal life, I mean, I used to be shy when I was younger, and I'm less shy now, but I'm still not the kind of person who loves being the center of attention. So this is really against my nature in a way. It just started by accident, where I've told this story before, but I thought that one ex-Muslim YouTuber was being doxxed. So I sent him a message and I gave him a heads up. And he then interviewed me on his YouTube channel. We did a live stream together. I didn't turn on my camera. It was just my voice. And even just speaking with him for an hour during that live stream, a lot of people were telling me to start my own YouTube channel. And I laughed at the idea, and I thought, no, there's no way. And it was Friendly Ex-Muslim. He encouraged me to start posting on TikTok. So I started posting there, talking about all my ideas about how Islam is not true and how my life has been since leaving Islam and the difficulties that I face. But I found that medium to be too restrictive, because it values more snappy, funny sort of videos, which I can do, but in a topic that's so serious, sometimes the point is missed if all you do is make a quick joke and that's the end of it. So I've tried to incorporate humor still in my videos, but I need more time to explain my thoughts. So I've done live streams and videos on YouTube ever since. It's been 2 or 3 years now, I believe. I found a lot of success with it in terms of reaching people's minds and hearing from people and platforming people in a way that I hadn't seen done exactly that way that I wanted to see on YouTube before. So even though every ex-Muslim YouTuber has their niche and their style, I didn't find one that spoke to me in the exact way that I wanted to hear. So I started my own channel, I suppose. And ever since then, I've been motivated by all the words of the people who have reached out and said how much this has helped them. And I think that there's a lot of room for change, a lot of room for progress, a lot of people to help, a lot of people whose minds can be changed if they just heard a reasonable person talk about the topic. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. I feel very blessed to be in this position, and I take some safety measures still. I wear a mask. People don't know my name and so on, because I want to do this as long as possible without being in danger or without any of my family members being in danger. But I have goals to continue doing this for as long as I can, because I think my approach is really needed in this space. And if I don't do it, I don't see a lot of people doing it the way that I like. So instead of lecturing people on how to do it, I'm doing it myself.
Yeah, and what you're doing is clearly working by your growth, channel growth. I think a lot of people like what you do. I want to ask you how you deal with hate. Do you get a lot of that in the comments? I'm sure you do, but how much is...
Yeah, I used to get a lot more hate than I do now, but it comes and goes in waves, I suppose. I even made a video recently about how a guy sent me threats in voice notes a couple of years ago, and I spoke about how I dealt with that and how I managed to understand where he's coming from and kind of disarm his anger. So at first, that hate used to be really heavy on me till I realized that it's not really about me. They would say the same thing to anyone who's saying what I'm saying, or it's just about their idea of a disbeliever or their idea of an ex-Muslim. And that makes it a lot less personal. So I've been coping with it that way and realizing that it's inevitable, I suppose, that it's not personal. And I've been through waves of sort of depression with this work where I don't feel like I have a point in any of this. I don't feel like I'm making a difference. But through the interactions with the community, through having a community, I am able to realize the full extent of how valuable this work is. So the hate doesn't bother me as much when I'm seeing all the fruits of my work.
Good way to put it. So, do you get a lot of comments asking you to talk about other religions? I ask because I personally get that. So whenever I talk about religion a lot in my videos, and mostly Hinduism, because I'm personally ex-Hindu. I grew up in a Hindu household. And when I do that, I get a lot of comments saying, hey, why don't you talk about Christianity or Islam? If you call yourself an atheist, you should be impartial. And I know you don't use the label atheist, you say ex-Muslim. I don't say ex-Hindu, I say atheist, I say rationalist, I use all that. So maybe that's why people give me those comments. But do you get those?
Yes, I get those comments all the time from Muslims who say, why are you only criticizing Islam? You should be criticizing all other religions. And when I point out that that is the religion that I know most about and the one that I really care about the effects of, because all the other ones are less personal to me. I lived among Muslims. I know Muslims. So I would like to see improvements in their lives. And I would like to see improvements in the lives of people who have to live with Islam. So I don't know all that much about other religions, and I don't have an interest necessarily in talking about atheism or in proving that there is no God. My position is that I don't think any of the religions that exist are actually from God. I don't know if there could be a God or not. I think that's an irrelevant question for me and for a lot of people that I care about. The question is, how do these religions make claim to God? So I leave the discussions about other religions to people who are more experienced and know more about these other religions. But every now and then, I do sprinkle in a couple of facts from other religions to show that my criticism is not explicitly about Islam. It can apply to Christianity, it can apply to Hinduism. And when I do that, followers of those religions get really angry. And they say, well, no, I'm not here for that. I'm here to see you crap on Islam all day long. And I say that that's not the point. I'm here to help you get critical thinking. And if that applies to your religion as well, then so be it. But from their perspective, I should not talk about it because I'm not an expert, which is the same thing that Muslims tell me. So that's ironic.
And I think we spoke about this earlier, how you said TikTok is more geared towards making snappy and funny content. That's the type of content that tends to do well. And sometimes I feel that even on YouTube, a lot of audience, a lot of viewers, they want to see some sort of drama, some sort of beef. Like in my case, they want to see me attack someone who made some claims about the Hindu religion. Like they want to see me say something explicitly aggressive. And those are the videos that tend to get viewed more often. Do you find a similar issue? Like I can see how some other ex-Muslim channels that I know do this a lot. They tend to create drama and beef with Muslim channels. And what are your thoughts on this? And do you face that issue with your content?
Yeah, so I've definitely noticed that things that are more controversial and more aggressive will get more views, whether it's religion or anything else in general. And what I've noticed in the ex-Muslim space, even before I began making videos, is that when Muslims criticize an ex-Muslim YouTuber, for example, they can be extremely vicious and in ways that I haven't seen on the Christian side of YouTube. When it comes to ex-Christians and atheists talking about Christianity, there might be belittling, there might be some condescending remarks here and there, but it's never as vicious as the way that Muslims do it to us. And a lot of them justify it with the thought that, well, if we apply Sharia law, you would be executed. So me calling you words is not really that big of a deal in comparison. So then the reaction from ex-Muslim YouTubers is often, kind of in the same language. If you call me names, if you belittle me, then I'm going to belittle you and your religion. I'm going to call you names back. I've even seen some ex-Muslims use dirty tactics like mentioning someone's dead relative in a debate just to rile them up or upset them. It's a very low move, and I don't think that it's really sticking to the topic of the debate or the discussion. So ex-Muslims are not beyond doing that. And I have noticed that whenever I call out Muslim preachers, if they're hateful, if I'm more aggressive in my language, if I am more challenging, if I call them names and belittle them, I get more views on my videos. But I've avoided doing that intentionally. And I think that's because that's all we know, I suppose. That's all these YouTubers know. That's how they deal with everything. So when, for example, I criticize other YouTubers on the ex-Muslim side of YouTube, I get accused of doing what they do with Muslims, which is trying to farm views from controversy, when I actually don't want views from controversy because they bring a hostile environment to your channel. And my channel is known for, and hopefully will always be known for, not being a hostile space, for being a place where people can calm down and think about their beliefs and their past beliefs instead of just trying to win points against the other side.
That's well put, because when you engage in beef and drama, that's when the message tends to get lost. If we feel the message we're trying to bring out is more important, then it's best not to engage in drama. You're right. So one more thing I wanted to speak to you about is, I don't know how much of it is true now, but a few years back, I would notice that online there tends to be a kind of hostility towards atheists. A lot of people, they might themselves be atheists, but they don't adopt this atheist label. They view atheists as these unfeeling, unempathetic, rationality bros who need evidence before they declare anything valid, and they tend to dismiss most things that you say, saying, hey, there's no evidence for any of this. This attitude tended to get a lot of hate from a lot of people, And this was the general view towards atheists. I wanted to get your thoughts on, this hostility towards atheists.
I think part of it might stem from the atheism movement on the internet in the 2010s and how it had an air of hostility and belittling to it. I suppose as a reaction to all the Christianity that has not been challenged for a long time. So internet atheists in the 2010s were very edgy. They were very hostile. And then eventually they jumped on the anti-social justice warrior bandwagon. So it was a very messy scene. And I think some of these stereotypes still stick today. And there's no denying that some atheists out there, when it comes time to argue religion, it's all about facts and logic and rationality. But obviously, that's not how humans operate. And I don't like that, in the same way that I don't like when religious people pretend that they believe in religion because of facts and rationality and logic, when that's usually not the case. For example, a lot of Muslims would accuse someone who leaves Islam of only leaving for emotional reasons, and they don't have any logical reasons for leaving, when that's not necessarily always true. But on the other side, no one criticizes a believer for believing for emotional reasons. And when the scripture is full of emotional manipulation and emotional tactics designed to make you believe despite the lack of any evidence. So I don't like that approach, whether it's coming from a believer or a critic of the religion. But there are a lot of atheists out there who know that it's not just about facts and logic, who understand that the human psyche is more complicated than that. And they're doing a lot to improve the image of atheists everywhere, I suppose. And you use the label atheist. I don't. And I guess that I have a question for you. I hesitate to use the label atheist because again, the point that I'm talking about here is not that you shouldn't believe in God. And I don't even claim that there is no God. So I worry that using the label atheist might give off the impression that I'm saying there is no God, and this is why I'm arguing for that position. So why do you use the label atheist?
I actually don't. I think people do recognize me as an atheist. I do say that my position is one of atheism, but I claim that I don't believe in God, not that I believe there are no gods. I make it a point to make a distinction between those two claims. I prefer the label rationalist because in India, the label atheism is also used by religious Hindus. So you can be a believing Hindu, follow Hindu customs, traditions, ways of life, while not believing in a supernatural power or a god or whatever. And they call themselves Hindu atheists. And I don't like this term because I think atheism should be synonymous with non-religious, or it should have that connotation. But a lot of Hindus, what they do is they kind of appropriate this term atheist, and they label themselves atheist while still being Hindu. That makes no sense to me. Like I said, the label that I adopt is rationalist. I believe in things that are consistent with reality, which is what a rationalist is, in my opinion. And so, that's my answer. I hope I answered.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess my hesitation to use another label than ex-Muslim is partly because part of what I do is motivated by wanting people to know that we exist. So more than I want to advocate for the lack of a religion, I want to advocate for the existence of ex-religious people, especially ex-Muslims. And a viewer who's not a Muslim or ex-Muslim might watch this and think, well, of course ex-Muslims exist, just as ex-Christian people exist. But from the perspective of a lot of religious Muslims, that is an impossible concept. People leave other religions because other religions are false, but people don't leave Islam because Islam is not false. So if they leave, they were never religious to begin with, and so on and so forth. The same thing that every other group says. So I want to use my brand and my presence to notify people, let them know that ex-Muslims do exist.
So along the same lines of whatever we were discussing right now, atheists come in all sorts of flavors. Like, atheism isn't a monolith. There are all kinds of atheists. There are people that are unempathetic. There are religious atheists, like we talked about. So I think it's unfair also, and you mentioned this also. It's unfair for people to have this one opinion about atheists that they're all what rationality proves or whatever it is, or whatever opinion people might have about atheists. There shouldn't be this boxing in of all atheists have these views XYZ. It shouldn't be like that, in my opinion. You should look at an individual, whether they're atheist or a religious person, by whatever values they hold.
I agree. And like you said, I think that also applies to religious people. And when I say that not all Muslims think the same, and Islam is not just this one concept that can be criticized in one way, people often confuse this with me caring for Muslims specifically or having a soft spot for Muslims. That's not the case. I think even if you want to deal with the problem of Islam, even if you view Islam as a problem that needs to be dealt with, you cannot deal with it by just repeating the same things on and on again and denying reality. And the reality is that people believe in different ways. And even though you might argue that they must believe a certain explicit interpretation of their religion, many of them don't, and they don't have a good basis for their beliefs, and that's fine. You just have to acknowledge the reality of things so you can tailor an approach that makes sense to them. Otherwise, you're just preaching to the converted already.
Yeah. And also, if you bring in jokes, if you bring in condescension, if you bring in any sort of attack in your message, again, you're only preaching to the converted, because the unconverted are not going to listen to you if you're like this. That's how I create my content also.
I mostly agree, but I go further than you in the humor department. I still make jokes. I don't think that we should respect the religion to the extent of not making any jokes because it's blasphemous or that people's feelings might get hurt. I acknowledge that might happen, but the nature of the jokes is what matters to me. The jokes are not designed to belittle the person, the believer. They're not designed to mock them and make them feel stupid for believing, but it is more like we're having a laugh about the beliefs, and they can join in if they'd like. This is not at their expense. So if you make them feel like the target of the joke, then it's not going to work. But if you just abstract the belief and the religion from the believer and you criticize that, they might even start to find the humor in it. And that's what I see very often. I mean, I thought I would get a lot more backlash for my videos where I have the prophets drawn and animated, which is something that's a huge no-no that a lot of people get in trouble for and even get killed for. But so far, I haven't really gotten in any trouble for it. And I don't even get that many hateful comments under it. If anything, I sometimes find Muslims saying, I know this is blasphemous. I know I'm not supposed to watch this, but I think this is really funny. So that's how humor works in these situations. But I also respect that you take a more science-based approach to it, I guess, a more academic approach, and you don't really enter to the realm of humor or anything that could be perceived as mockery. And I think every approach should be appreciated in its own way. Even the belittling. Some people make arguments for using a belittling approach to deal with the people who would belittle you. I don't know how productive it is, but I think every approach needs to exist. We just don't need one type to dominate the whole conversation.
I wouldn't say my content is strictly academic. I do take a look at studies, and I do talk about how to interpret what people are saying. So, for instance, I do that because a lot of religious folk and all, they use studies to make it look like whatever they're claiming is valid. And I talked about what is the rational way in which you should look at it. You should look at the study. But yeah, I do venture into humor in some of my content. But yeah, like you said, I make it a point not to make my jokes be a route for mockery. I try not to mock the ones, especially the target of my criticism in my jokes. I try to do that, but yeah, lately I've not been using a lot of humor in my content. But yeah, these are unscripted, so I tend to, if some joke comes to mind in the moment, I tend to say it. But yeah, those are the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Not at the moment. I appreciate you giving me a chance to have this discussion. And I know that we will collaborate in the future. I know that there's a lot that we can do together that both of our audiences would find novel and interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Apostate Aladdin. I've left details of his channel and all in the description and in the title. Is there any other place people can find?
Mostly YouTube. I mean, I have Instagram as well, but I don't use it very often. I just use it to announce my videos. So follow me there if you'd like. But yeah, YouTube is where it's at. And Patreon if you feel like supporting me.
Thank you, Apostate Aladdin. Thank you for being here. And thank you for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.
Bye-bye.